reading news from America. Apparently the Ahmaud Arbery verdict is bringing glimmerings of racial blood, which is as absurd as thinking that the Carl Rittenhouse verdict was bringing glimmerings of law enforcement healing. So, right, Joyce and the Carl Rittenhouse verdict, the left and center and center right is rejoicing in the Ahmaud Arbery verdict. Apparently applause for the verdict has come across the political spectrum, according to the New York Times. So I understand why the New York Times and other news media like to hype everything. Like when you make things as dramatic as possible, and talk about how much they signify, and how deep and meaningful they are, and how they represent glimmerings of this national change and this form of national healing. You're incentivizing people to come and consume your product because you make it as exciting as possible. But what about people who really believe that the Ahmaud Arbery verdict portends something for America? Well, this is absurd. This goes back to the old meaning versus connection thing. Into things where there isn't any greater meaning. There may not be any greater meaning in the Ahmaud Arbery verdict. Right? This may not represent a glimmering of racial healing in the United States. It's a kind of desperation when you try to read into like a single verdict like this in Georgia, or 11 out of 12 of the jurors were white, and this pretends like some kind of great racial healing. Like this is the equivalent of the ancients looking at the strewn intestines of a bird or some animal and trying to divine the future, right? That's what the New York Times and the media are doing, and they do this routinely. They strew out the guts of some news story, and then from the entrails of the news story, they try to read out a greater meaning about what this portends for America, for the direction of the United States, or this portends for black-white relations, what this portends for law enforcement, what this portends for our justice system, what this portends for racial healing. Right? It's every bit as valid as ripping the guts out of a cat and then trying to predict the future from those entrails. Right? What kind of people are so desperate for meaning that they have to see this great racial healing? Yeah, the greatest problems in the black community are marauding gangs of white men. Give me a break. Right? So don't be messing around in communities where you don't live, trespassing on other people's property, and have a criminal record and behave like a criminal and expect that you're going to stay out of trouble. So, on the other hand, there is something to be learned. Don't go chasing people down in a truck with a gun, just because you believe that they're guilty of theft, right? Don't try to be a hero like that. Don't take law enforcement with your own hands. Don't go chasing after people with a gun. It just leads to a lot of bad outcomes. So, one thing that comes out of this, a little bit of common sense. Yeah, low gun death rate in Australia. And that may not actually have to do with the availability of guns, because it seems like different groups of people have different propensities to commit violent crime, whether it's with a gun or the knife or the car. So, in large part, demographics and social policies and community mores and the state of family life will shape how much violence we have. No Aussies running after Aborigines, jogging through their neighborhoods. Yeah, that doesn't happen very much. Right? So Australia has very strict gun control laws. But Australia had very low rates of crime prior to really strict gun control laws. So overall rates of violent crime have not varied much, though criminologists debate how much impact the Port Arthur mass shooting, on about 20 people were killed in Port Arthur, Australia, and then the Conservative Prime Minister John Howard cracked down on gun ownership, gun control, and so criminologists have debated how much that affected rates of gun violence in the country. But Australia's always had minuscule rates of gun violence, even when it had widespread gun ownership. But I just think it's sad if people get so much of their hopes and dreams, wrapped up in the outcome of the court case on either Ahmaud Arbery or Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, what I am curious about in light of Kyle Rittenhouse, whether militias will become more combative in standing up to Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests. Sometimes there is significance in a news event, and a lot of times there isn't quite a significance. So the more you are, the less need you have to read meaning into greater events where there may not be such meaning. So we walk through Randwick into about a kilometer from the beach, right? So it's rained every day since I've been here. And kind of sad how desperate people are to find meaning for their lives, sustenance for their lives, emotional, spiritual, social significance, and hope for their lives from the news. Right? News should not be like a great source of meaning and sustenance and spirituality. There's a little thunder. The news presents a highly distorted view of reality. News is a business, and the business depends upon hyping and dramatizing and over-exaggerating and assigning way too much importance to all sorts of things that don't deserve much importance, such as the 3 years of the Russia stole the 2016 election obsession gripped American news media. So I'm dropping many of my subscriptions, I think, to might keep the New York Times, might keep the Wall Street Journal, might keep the Washington Post, might keep the LA Times for a time. Standing here in Sydney, Australia, what goes on in Los Angeles doesn't seem really as important. A lot of Americans move here and then they move back because they feel like they've moved to an isolated part of the world. They just feel really out of it. So maybe I'm simply in that stage where I'm romanticizing Sydney. But I think a change would be good. And not much downside making this move. And moving gives you a perspective. Travel gets me out of my routines. I no longer have this safe, routinized life where I'm protected by my habits. And now I just have to confront myself head on. Without my routine protections, without my safe spaces, I have to share a lot of space. I have to learn to get along with people. I have to more closely monitor my effect. With the honeymoon end in Sydney and then reality set in. Well, yeah, honeymoon always ends. But if that happens, then at least I will have spent more time with my family, challenge myself, have some new experiences, reconnect with old friends, make new friends here in